Welcome to the Single Point, which is a division of the Rouge Radio podcast where we go one-on-one with a specific guest. And in this week, in continuation of our 9 teams in 9 weeks, we focus on the BC Lions. And who else to talk Lions is the BC Lions play-by-play guy, Bob Marjonovich. Bob, thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Hey, not at any time. Anytime we're going to talk CFL football, we are about 23 days away from preseason. What's the atmosphere in BC? Obviously, the NHL season ended prematurely for my Jets, but obviously with the Vancouver Canucks, is there any anticipation for CFL football in BC?
To be honest, I think people right now are kind of in a show-me type of mood. There's been hype. I mean, I remember when Mike Riley was brought into BC and Devon Claybrooks was hired as coach. I mean, the hype machine went into overdrive. Fans were so excited about the season, and you had a lot of people that were kind of on the periphery looking in, and even they were kind of, talking Lions football and hoping that the Lions would have a big year, and unfortunately they kind of fell flat that year. But, yeah, I mean, for the people that are here that are Lions fans, there is optimism. Nathan Rourke, of course, is probably one of the biggest reasons why. And, of course, some of the additions that this team has made in free agency. So, Mike Riley leaving allowed the team to go out there and sign some free agents that they probably wouldn't have been able to sign had Riley stayed. I mean, Brian Burnham even told us that had Mike Riley stayed, he probably would have been gone, but because the team probably didn't have enough money to sign him. But it opened up the wallet, I guess, or the coffers for the BC Lions, and they went out and got some good players. And it's the $1 million gamble right now because, Nathan Rourke showed a lot in that game against Edmonton. But remember, this is an Elk team that was playing its third game in 7 days. It was the last game of the season. And he was the backup quarterback. It's going to be a different animal all of a sudden now when you're the starting quarterback. And part of this, move by the Lions or their strategy was to not spend too much money in the backup quarterback position. So Michael O'Connor is his backup, Nathan Rourke. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Nathan Rourke to perform. But if he does, and given some of the free agent signings that this Lions team has made, I think they're going to be very competitive.
I was going to mention, I was going to ask about that later because obviously everybody wants to see a Canadian quarterback succeed in the CFL. The BC Lions evidently now have two in Michael O'Connor and Nathan Rourke. Are there expectations that many may seem as unreasonable with that? Or is there just going to be a regular quarterback that hasn't had that much experience in the CFL?
I think the latter. And I think the thing with Nathan Rourke, if you've been around this kid, he's really wired to you get a good feeling being around him, right? I mean, we talked to him last year, Julio Caravetta and I walked up to him one day at practice and said, so what's been the biggest adjustment in terms of being a pro? He says, not playing. It wasn't about the speed of the game or, the tempo or playing Canadian versus, coming out of the American college game. He just said, I'm not playing. Right? I mean, this kid has a lot of confidence. He's got a high football IQ, and he's got a cannon for an arm. Plus, he's mobile. So, he's got some great qualities. The biggest thing right now is just experience, and how does he handle the pressure of being the number one?
How short is the leash? Because he's got experience, but not necessarily starter experience. How far down the road in the season do you expect the coaches to maybe that leash to shorten as the season progresses?
Well, I think it depends on what Michael O'Connor shows in preseason and in training camp, right? Remember that Rourke knows the system, O'Connor doesn't. But they're going to have to get Michael O'Connor up to speed pretty quick. I really believe that this team, the management of this team and the coaching staff believes that Nathan Rourke is going to get this done for him. And I say that because if there was doubt, why not go out and get a veteran quarterback to back up Nathan Rourke? Instead, they went out and got a Canadian in Michael O'Connor. Who knows what Michael O'Connor is going to show in training camp and in the preseason. But I just think the leash is going to be long with Nathan Rourke. He's really going to have to screw things up pretty bad to see Michael O'Connor get in there. And I think the other thing, too, is I don't even think Michael O'Connor is going to be the second option for the team right now. I think that if things really do go sideways for Nathan Rourke, I think they will probably wind up bringing a veteran quarterback.
Just step off the field here, because last week we talked about the Edmonton Elks and the breath of fresh air that their new CEO was brought in with Victor Cui. Last year, the BC Lions were under new ownership. Talk about your experience and what do you expect with so far. I mean, we kind of saw how the new ownership in Marjonovich has brought in, but what are you expecting? Like, what's the next step under this new ownership going into 2022?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people have asked about the new ownership. I haven't really seen anything yet that, that signifies a dramatic change in terms of what the ownership approach is towards marketing the team. But, we've been told there are a lot of things in the works. And, Mark Doman came out and said that you don't want to miss opening night. It's going to be one of the events of the year. So I don't know what they have planned up their sleeve, but I mean, it sounds interesting. I'll say one thing being around Mr. Doman, and that's the fact that he's a visionary. He has a vision in terms of what he wants to do with this team, how he wants to market it, how he wants to brand it, how he wants to sell it. He made a great point. He said, he goes, I've got 3 kids. He says, they're all in the NFL. None of them wears a Lions jersey. He says, they're all NFL fans. And he says, we've got to get to those kids, to that younger generation, and turn them on to the CFL. So I think that's his major goal. And one of the things that you're seeing with the Lions this offseason, especially on social media, is a lot of visits to elementary schools, to high schools, just during the course of the offseason, going around the province and, promoting the brand. So I think that's something that they focused on, and hopefully they're going to see some of the fruits of their labor.
Speaking of youth, the CFL draft is coming up soon in a matter of days. The BC Lions have the 3rd overall spot. Any talk of who the Lions will take, or if there are talks of trading up? Because the Lions have been linked to the Philpott twins, and I even saw something online. I don't know if it was earlier today or the other day, but there might be a Sedin type deal where they'll trade up to number 2 or number 3, or number 3 and number 4 to take the Philpott twins. Have you heard any of what the BC Lions may do with that 3rd overall pick?
Well, I think one of the Philpott twins will get chosen by the Lions at that point. Now, are they going to get the other one? That's the question. I talked to somebody around the league, and I haven't made too many phone calls on this, but I just had a casual conversation with someone today in a management position, and they said they doubt very much that the Lions will be able to swing a deal to get both Philpotts. So that probably means that whoever has that other pick, who they're probably targeting, I don't know who that would be. I think Edmonton's going to go in on the linebacker from Syracuse. So, maybe we'll see what happens at 2, the Lions at 3, see what happens at 4 or 5. But I don't think they're going to be able to get both, but I think that's something that the Lions are going to do their due diligence on. I think Neil McAvoy and Rick Campbell will do their due diligence on that and attempt to get both Philpotts, but I think it's going to be a tough task.
Speaking of upper management, the Lions lost G. Simon to the Elks. How much will the Lions front office miss the hole? I don't know if it's a gaping hole, but how much will they miss the presence of, I guess, all-time Lion great G. Simon?
That it's an interesting question, and there's a part of me that says that they're really not going to miss G-Roy that much. And that's not a knock on G-Roy. That's just a knock on the structure that they had within the team. And that was that Neil McAvoy was the assistant GM, and Rick Campbell, of course, was the assistant, or probably they're co-GMs, not assistant GM, but co-GMs. And G-Roy really didn't have that much influence at all when Ed Hervey was here. He had a little bit more when Rick Campbell and Neil McAvoy took over the general manager duties. And I think G-Roy's voice was heard, but I still think ultimately the call was between Campbell and McAvoy and a lot of the personnel decisions. I think G-Roy has much more of a voice in Edmonton. And just talking to G-Roy about working with Chris Jones and being part of the Elks management team, I think he's got way more influence, way more of an impact on what's going on in Edmonton this year. And again, it's not a knock on G-Roy. It's just, a knock on how they structured the system.
You mentioned Brian Burnham, who I think is probably as many numbers as he puts up. I still think that Brian Burnham is still one of the most underrated receivers in the CFL, and that's saying a lot. They brought in Lucky Whitehead through free agency last year, and aside from his injury, he was putting up MVP type numbers. Are the Lions satisfied with their receivers, the receiver depth behind those two? Because there were talks that they were going hard on Kenny Lawler, but ended up losing out to him to the Edmonton Elks. So is there kind of a little bit of question marks as far as the depth position behind Whitehead and Burnham?
Well, I think, anytime a player like Kenny Lawler's available, you have to go out there and, see if you can sign him because he is a quality receiver. It's funny you mentioned G-Roy Simon. G-Roy Simon actually had got Kenny Lawler into the Lions camp a couple of years ago. And this is when Ed Hervey was the GM. And I guess what had happened was that Lawler had gotten hurt. And I remember Lawler telling me this at the Grey Cup. He got hurt. And then there was a bit of an issue in terms of his rehabilitation and who was going to take responsibility for it, how they were going to go about it. And the Lions, I guess, just kind of said, well, you're kind of on your own. He was expecting the Lions to have a little bit more of an impact in it in terms of either the treatment and or the financial reimbursement or compensation off it. And that kind of left a sour taste in Kenny Lawler's mouth. And he wound up, eventually signing with Winnipeg. And G-Roy Simon had really, really liked him and wanted to get him into camp and got him into camp. And he got hurt. And, of course, as we say, the rest is history. But now, of course, it kind of reunited. So, I could see the Lions going after Lawler. He's an impact guy. But in terms of the receivers, I think, they've got two quality receivers. I mean, they got the guy like Whitehead who can take everything vertical, open things up for underneath for Burnham. Burnham's a receiver who's not going to get you much separation, but, man, he doesn't need much. I mean, you give him like 3 feet and you put the ball in the right place. We've seen him win so many contested battles. But, I think a guy like Keon Hatcher could step up this year. I think another player who could step up for him is, Dominic Rhymes. I think he's another player who could step up. And Javon Catoy is really interesting. I mean, this kid has it all. He has size. He has speed. I think, once he learns the nuances, and I think he's getting better every year in terms of, recognizing defensive coverage, working on his patterns. His routes, I should say. I think that Javon Catoy is a guy who could really explode out of the gates and have a big season for him. So, and a wild card out of this as well is DeAnthony Thomas, who had some pretty good years in the National Football League with the Kansas City Chiefs and University of Oregon product who the Lions have signed. So we'll see if he's a bit of a wild card in training camp and what he brings.
Yeah, another piece of the offense that I think has given Lions fans headaches over the last couple of years is the offensive line. Their issue is, being able to keep, their quarterback upright for long periods of time. Now, that might have actually pushed Mike Riley into retirement sooner rather than later. Do they have the pieces to be able to help the young guys like Nathan Work or O'Connor be successful in the 2022 season?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I think that's probably the biggest concern with this team, and maybe that's one, and then you might have 1A, which I'll get to in a second. But I think probably the biggest concern is the offensive line. There's talk that they're probably going to try to go with 3 Americans on the offensive line. We'll see how that impacts the O-line. Kent Perkins, I think, played rather well last year when he came in and played tackle for Riker Matthews. And Matthews, of course, had played 1 or 2 games, had the concussion issue, and he was done for the year. Joel Figueroa is getting up there, but, this is a guy that, he'll give you everything that he's got. This is a guy that you want in a foxhole with you. Suk Chung I think Suk Chung is a very good offensive lineman in a certain system. Suk Chung is great. He wants to play you in a phone booth. You know what I mean? And that's why I think he was so successful in Winnipeg, because they ran the ball so much and, kind of really played to Suk Chung's strengths. I just think that, if you're throwing the ball as much as the Lions did the last couple of years, you're kind of taking away from Suk Chung's strength. His strength is, playing in that phone booth, grinding it out, being, going downhill on run blocking situations. So we'll see what, how this year pans out. And I think what they got to do is I think the biggest concern is center. And Peter Godber had a really, really tough year last year at center. And, people you could tell the teams are scheming on him, scheming against him, trying to get one-on-one matchups. I mean, I hate to say it and pick on the kid, but, man, I can't remember seeing a center get called for that many holding penalties as Peter Godber did. That's pretty tough to do. If you're a center, trust me, there's like guards around you. You've got like 1,400 pounds of beef within 6 foot circumference, and you're getting called for flags for holding. It's not a good sign. The really, the wild card I think for the Lions on the offensive line again is a guy like David Neville. Here's a guy who's 27. He's been in the league a few years now. He's got size. He's played well when he's got in there. But for whatever reason, it just hasn't seemed to click. I would love to see the Lions just give him a start. Well, I shouldn't say give him a starting job. I'd like to see David Neville earn a starting job, and the Lions just give him a really long rope to see what he can do, because he's a guy that I just think, University of Nebraska kid, he's got a nice pedigree. He's a guy that I think can play, but he needs an opportunity, or he has to earn that opportunity.
Yeah. Speaking of, we're talking about going hard in free agencies. The Lions went hard upgrading their defense in 2022. Guys like Delvin Breaux, Lucius Purifoy, and then Steven Richardson. However, a couple of weeks ago, he had an off-season workout, which now he might miss a huge amount of time. We'll be lucky. Hopefully, the BC Lions will be in a good position for playoffs when it comes back. How much will they miss Steven Richardson on that defensive line? Because they have Woody Barron, David Menard, Steven Richardson. I still think is like one of the most underrated defensive linemen. Again, he came over from Winnipeg, had high hopes to clog up the run, and they won't have him for a good chunk of the season. Is that a gaping hole, or do the BC Lions have maybe a plan B behind Richardson?
Well, I mean, your plan B behind Richardson is Josh Banks, who they had there last year. But he's no Stove Richardson, right? I mean, to me, that when I heard that he was basically done for the year, I'm hearing it's an Achilles. When I heard that, that had occurred, I was just like, it was crushing, because of all the signings that they had, I was the most excited about Richardson. And I think of all the signings that they had, probably the most non-replaceable or irreplaceable signing was Richardson. I mean, what he did, you're right. I mean, to me, one of the more underrated players in the league. I mean, this is a guy who can play the one technique, take on double teams, allow your linebackers to roam freely. He's a guy who can push the pocket back. And I always talk about this, and, this is my old defensive line coach coming out from my days at UBC. But, I mean, you got guys off the edge on any team that can get there. I mean, anybody can just, get off the edge. But what makes those edge rushers successful is when you have the pocket being pushed back by your interior linemen, the guys playing the 1 and 3 techniques, those guys pushing the pocket back. Because now what happens, that quarterback, usually if that pocket's not being pushed back, that quarterback can step up underneath that edge rusher and find a seam and take off or gain more time to throw the football. But if that pocket is being pushed back, it's like a net that now surrounds the quarterback. He's got nowhere to step up. Now he kind of does a little pirouette 360s trying to do something, and the next thing you know, you wind up sacking the quarterback. So losing Richardson to me was a huge, huge blow, because it wasn't just about what Stove Richardson brought to the table. It's how much better he makes everybody else on that D-line. And look at Winnipeg with Jefferson and Conbo, right? I mean, Jake Thomas, all those guys were better because Stove Richardson was there. And not to downplay their accomplishments, but, man, he was a huge, huge part of that Winnipeg defense. And it would have been nice to see what he could do in BC.
Yeah, he missed the first few games in 2021. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, which put up record numbers, they weren't that good against the run. Steven Richardson comes in, and they improved dramatically. Like, that's how good he was. Bob, last question before we go, and as we do with every one of our guests prior in our preseason, our 9 teams in 9 weeks, predict the BC Lions record going into the 2022 season.
Oh, 18 games this year, right?
Yeah.
I would probably go. I'm just going to say 9-9.
Okay,
with
that's
a swing of
bet.
2 games.
Okay, so as
9-9, and they could be 11-7. They could be 7-11. So let's say 9-9 with a 2-game swing.
All right, there we go. Bob, we'd like to thank you for staying up. Although you're on the West Coast, you didn't stay too late for us, but we definitely appreciate you coming on the show. Outside of, obviously, where we can listen to you calling the games this year, where else can our listeners find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at @thereal_Moj. Also on Instagram at @therealmoj, and the website mojonsports.com, where we have a whole bunch of great interviews called the Bio Series, where we talk to athletes, celebrities, VIPs about their careers and how they got to where they were, and some of the influences, some of the ups and downs. And we've got plenty of CFL content on there. Wally Buono, Rick Campbell, Travis Lulay, hoping to get Adam Bighill here in the next little while. So, yeah, mojonsports.com, and again, those social media platforms.
Right on. Again, Bob, thanks again for staying up, and good luck to yourself and the BC Lions in 2022.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Let's do it again.